Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Now, these videos of going through each individual exercise and explaining in detail about what I'm doing, it's been doing quite well for me anyway. Averaging more views than the rest of them, so clearly you like them. So this one is going to go even deeper in, so you get a full understanding of how a laying hamstring curl will not only improve your leg training, improve your hamstring size, and why we choose a lying versus a seated, or even just when's appropriate for them to be in. Let's start by looking at the anatomy of the hamstrings, just so you can see what you're trying to do in your head. So here we have the anatomy in front of us. We have three hamstring muscles, two major ones that you're actually going to see when you're lean on stage. So you've got the bicep femoris, which is on the outside, and I'm not even going to try and say that. I'll give it a go, which is the semitendinosus. Basically, it's the inner head. If we think about this in relation to the bicep in your arm that we all know, it works very much the same. So there's attachment at the hip or just above the hip into the pelvis, an attachment below the knee. Now, these are two things that people miss. They think it's just the back. Most people think it attaches here and ends here, but no. So having different hip positions to bend the knee is super important. So if we use an example here we've got an RDL. So an RDL is fairly straight leg. So we're not bending the knee at all, but we're bending at the hip. So we're lengthening it from this angle. Now with a lying, we're keeping this straight. So we're lengthening and contracting from here. Now a seated hamstring curl, this is already stretched. So if you think about that being at a 45 degree and the knee bent, so it's already in a stretched position. So this is going to target the lengthened and shortened positions of the movement ever so slightly differently. And I'll touch on this a little bit later why. But what we're looking at doing is essentially keeping the pelvis as flat as possible. It's going to move a little bit, but really bending the knee and utilizing this attachment down here to create length and shortening the muscle through this movement. I want to interrupt this video just to talk to you about supplements. As a competitive bodybuilder, my performance, my recovery, and my health are all super important in my life. This is why I have been using Train by JP supplements for the last 5 years now. They cover everything from your pre, intra, and post-workout nutrition. They also offer health and joint supplementation. They also offer a nice stack and save option, which means that you don't have to think about which individual products you need. They're all there in a bundle package for you with a discount. If you click the link in the description below and use the code GPS10 at checkout, you'll get a 10% off your order. Now back to the video. So why a lying hamstring curl versus a seated hamstring curl? Because I've just said that actually it starts off in a longer position, and we know that having the muscle in a more lengthened position is slightly better for hypertrophy. But that doesn't mean that we want to neglect the shortened position. You know, as we do a preacher curl, we squeeze the bicep and get it nice and short. And this is essentially what the lying hamstring curl is doing. And it mimics a standing hamstring curl, very much the same. I would even say that they're basically the same movement, just this has a better brace. So when I program in a lying hamstring curl, will typically be on the same day as something where we're doing an RDL, so or even some form of hip hinge. So in a RDL, as mentioned before, we're lengthening the hamstring from the hip, but we haven't lengthened it from the knee. So that top part, if we're really thinking it from a really simplistic standpoint, we've lengthened the top, but not the bottom. So let's lengthen the bottom, like bend the bottom and not the top. Whereas a seated kind of encompasses all of that. So you could do this before an RDL if you wanted to warm up the hamstrings, and say if you have a really tough time connecting with your hamstrings, or if you've got quite a good affinity and you're quite strong at an RDL, then maybe we would want to put this afterwards to just finish them off if it's something that you want to bring up. So that's kind of where I would put these in and why I would put them there. The kind of rep ranges that we're working with are slightly lower as well, because it is a smaller muscle group, but they are strong. You know, if you think about how much people can deadlift, and that is all part of the posterior chain. So even though it's not going to be as much as, say, a RDL, you're not going to be moving hundreds and hundreds of kilos, you still want to keep that rep range kind of short. So I play anywhere between 6 to 12 reps. Might go a little bit higher, but you tend to see that people start moving the hips at that sort of range to get to those numbers. And we don't want to move them dramatically. A little bit of movement is fine, but we don't want to move them to a significant point. Now then, let's have a look at the setup. I'm going to play this video here and you can kind of see what I'm going to be doing as I'm setting up the camera here and just walking through. I'm making sure I got tracksuit bottoms on here, and I don't know why. I just prefer doing lying hamstring curls in tracksuit bottoms than shorts. I don't know whether it's something to do with the leather. It's just a preference for me. So what I have done there is I've aligned my hips with, there's a little crease in there. So my hips are in that crease. So now I'm slightly lengthening, not too much, but you can see there's a slight bend in the hips. My knees are in line with this pivot. So this pivot joint here is where the machine moves. Now, why is it important that we align our knees with the pivot? Our knee is a pivot joint in itself. It moves in pretty much one direction. So if we were to move our knee up or down, we're not only taking strength away from the movement, but we're putting tension on the actual joint because it's doing something that isn't matching the machine. I know a lot of people say you got to make the machine work around you, but sometimes there's things like this that you do have to work around the machine. So we're now aligning our knees with this pivot because that's what the machine dictates that we do. The pad here is something that lots of people talk about as well. Where do I place it? Do I place it on my heels, or do I place it as high up as I can? Now, what I typically like to do is place it just below my calves. Now, when people think that by loading at the heels, they think what they're doing is putting more tension on the hamstring, and that's actually not true. What it's doing is it's putting tension on the joint, because if you think about it from a physics standpoint, that knee joint is the brace. Sorry, I think I'm in the way of the mic. That knee joint is the brace. Now, the further away you get from that pivot point, the heavier it is going to be on that pivot. Now, we're not training our knees here. We're training this bit, our hamstrings. So we can actually maybe even slightly increase load. I'm not sure. I've not really played around with it too much. But by having the pad up slightly higher, but not crossing the calf, and the reason we don't want it to cross the calf is because the hamstring actually attaches below the knee, as we saw earlier. So having it impede the calf muscle, because the calf will be a secondary mover in this movement, will actually just feel slightly uncomfortable. And we also might limit range by that pad touching our hamstrings if you've got the range of motion. Now, the second thing that we're doing is keeping our hips, knees, and ankles aligned. Now, why are we doing this? The same point that we mentioned earlier about aligning with the pivot. This is only moving in one direction. Now, if your knees are splayed out, then it's trying to move in a direction that isn't matching the machine. If we match the machine, we're going to be more efficient. Is it going to be harder? Absolutely. But we don't care really about how much weight is on the bar in a movement like this. We care about how much tension is going through this hamstring. When I learned this, my hamstrings just blew up. I had to take a significant amount of weight off to begin with because my hamstrings were working pretty much on their own. When your toes flare out and you see the splaying, you're then contracting your glutes at the top. And as much as we want big glutes, or we want to grow those muscles, it's not in this movement. A little bit of glute carryover is going to happen, but we want this to really isolate the hamstring curl. Think of it like a preacher curl, for example. If in a preacher curl you're lifting your shoulder around and you can see your shoulders working, then you're taking some of the investment in those calories away from the bicep and putting them into the shoulder, which isn't always a bad thing, but in this case, I don't think it's relevant. So if we watch now, look at my hand position. I'm rotating and getting my upper body set. So my core is actually braced down, and it's coming down into a contracted position. And what this is going to do is lock my pelvis in as stable position as possible. Having that pelvis stable is going to be super important. And you can actually do that as well by pulling into these handles into the lats like a pull down, and it will really turn on the lats, which will brace your core and keep your pelvis nice and stable. Let's talk about cueing and absolute execution and kind of initiation of the movement to begin with. Lots of people, what they think about doing is flinging their heels almost up and over, which is fine. You know, there's hamstring involvement. We want to keep that pelvis stable. But what we find is there's a lack of brace. We've got this pad here, which is pretty much immovable, especially with your own body. You know, it's so fixed into the ground that we can really use it. Now, if you think about a preacher curl, in this example, we drive our tricep into it to create a stable environment. And we can do the same thing here. So what I actually like to do is, as I'm starting the movement, I'm actually pressing my thighs into the pad. It will keep the pelvis stable because the pelvis wants to rotate back and round in an arch. But actually, if we're pressing down, then we're almost thinking knees forward as heels come back. So if you watch as we go through here, you can see my quads are firmly in the pad. I'm coming up and round. Pelvis is staying nice and tight. Now, there is a little bit of movement at the top, and that's purely because where we know that the hamstring attaches into the pelvis, which is above the hip, in order to get it short, there needs to be a little bit of movement. So it's not the worst thing, but when you see people's back arching to an extent where it's dramatic, then that's just like flinging the weight around. Another cue that I like to think about with a lot of people that are struggling is actually keeping their toes slightly in. Now, why are we doing that? We mentioned earlier that we want to keep this all aligned. Now, when people get comfortable with the movement, they want their toes to flare. Now, you can see my toes are slightly flaring, but I'll touch on why that is in a second. There is method to my madness because I struggled with the toes in thing for a while. Now, when your toes come in, what will happen is as you come into, your feet will naturally flare if that's what you have a problem with. And they'll flare into a neutral position. So when we're in the contraction, then our feet will be in line. So that's a nice little top tip. But what I do, and my feet are actually externally rotated. So I walk on the outsides of my feet. As you can probably see from my shoes here, there's very little wear here and quite a lot on the outside. So I actually think about making my foot flat. I think about pressing the arch of my sole or the inside of my foot away the whole time. And that keeps my foot flat. And you can see it here. You can see, I just did it there. I corrected it. I'm pressing that foot out. And my feet don't actually move. And you can see through the even through the joggers actually, that's created even more stability. And it's a real fight for me because my body really wants to rotate my my feet inwards. So by doing that, I'm keeping this flat, nice, stable base, and it allows me to do that. Now, lots of people try and get this as short as possible, which is a good idea, but often purely executed. What we want to do is get the muscle as short as possible. This isn't dictated by the machine. This is dictated by how short you can get the muscle, and you can kind of tell. So if we're taking a lateral raise, for example, and you raise it to there, and the delt can't get any shorter, but you can get your arm up higher by raising your trap. It's the same kind of principle. So I could absolutely fling this further back, but I'm going to have to move all of this that I've spent time setting up. So keeping it short, in a sense, to just where the muscle is engaged, I believe is more important. And if we go back here as well, I'm rewinding a little bit, sorry. Taking a second, you know, the negative is so nice and controlled. There's a pause there's not momentum that's carrying it. I'm not flinging it around. Now, this is actually faster than I used to work. It took me a long time to get to this kind of Tempo, still very controlled, but I would spend a lot longer in the stretch position as I was learning this, and over time I've developed the skill in order to speed it up. So just a thing about tempo, setup, execution, and a few little top tips just about how to really get the most out of this movement. Finally then, let's talk about programming the actual movement into your training session. Now, most people nowadays do some form of either push-pull legs, upper lower, or something along those lines. It's very rare that someone is only having one leg day a week. So with that in mind, having a predominantly hamstring dominant day is where I would put this, because as we mentioned earlier, an RDL or some form of hip hinge would be on the same day as that lower body day. Now, if you were to do, it's not wrong, I'm not saying it's wrong to put it on your dedicated like quad day. You could absolutely put it in there if you really get on with this movement and just don't like the seated. But that's where I'd put it. I would also keep this to, as I said earlier, lower rep range, like a 6 to 10, maybe even an 8 to 12 would be a good place to be. I would also say, if you're new to this kind of not only training, but this is going to change your execution, spend a few more reps and take a little bit of a lighter load, just so that you can get, because the more times we do a rep, like the more reps we do, the better we're going to get at it. If you think about basketball players, how many times they throw a ball into a hoop, the first time they ever do it, they're not very good. But if they've done 1,000 free throws, then they get pretty damn good at it. And it's the same principle with training that I think lots of people miss out on. But I would also say on that is it's not one of those ones where you're one set and done. Now, if you're doing one set and you're taking it there and you're flinging the weights around at the end, you're just really going, right, how can I get 30 reps? That's great. The intensity is high, and that's what is very, very difficult to coach. But what I would say is, when that muscle has failed, leave it there. So if you fail at 12 reps, i.e. the hamstring or the form changes after 12 reps, leave it at 12, take a moment and go again, do a second set. It's a single muscle or a single joint movement. So it's very, very easy to recover from, in a sense of your whole body isn't smoked. An RDL, you do 2-3 sets and you could be absolutely trashed for the rest of the session. Whereas you get a hamstring pump, and your hamstrings know about it, but if you've got, I don't know, a quad extension after this, it's not going to take away from it really, other than maybe just feeling discomfort as you're just sitting on the pad. So it's not going to take away by doing 2, 3, even 4 sets of this. I'm not saying leave reps in reserve as such. I'm just saying that we want accuracy. This is an accurate movement, unless you already have a really good set of hamstrings where you've flung the weight around for a very long time. So that would be how I would program it. I prefer it after a hinge, because then we can get the most out of that hinge movement. We're not cooking our hamstrings beforehand. We're just almost finishing them off, putting the icing on the cake. And that's how I would program it. Overall then, I think this is a wonderful exercise. I think it's butchered by quite a lot of people, but when done right, it has a great carryover into overall hamstring development. I do think that if you're doing a single leg hamstring curl and a lay-in hamstring curl on the same day, you're kind of just doing the same thing without a brace. Do I think that single leg hamstring curls are good? Yeah, they have their place. If you get on with them, they're great. But I wouldn't put them on the same day. I would maybe split them up between 2 different leg days, because they're basically the same thing. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. Leave a like, leave a comment of the next video that you'd like me to see, breaking down an exercise and going through it. And I'll happily record and do a voiceover on that. And please subscribe as well. I'm also doing a giveaway of 1 month's free coaching when I hit 1,000 followers on Instagram. So head over to my Instagram, drop me a follow, and keep posted there. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next week.